Hey everybody, Mark from Rams up here. The preseason is over. Thank goodness. Rams finish with a 2-win, 1-loss record after falling to the Texans 17-15. That was not really a fun event. Not a lot of fun watching this game. I found myself actually watching Florida State, Georgia a little bit while the Rams were on, flipping back and forth. But some interesting things we learned from watching this game, and it's primarily about who played and who didn't. And that's the first thing I'm going to talk about here. Now, I had this exercise I went through the other day, not so much trying to predict a 53-man roster, although that's kind of what I did. I was trying to demonstrate the process the Rams will probably follow, and kind of just stressing the challenges that they're going to have in picking a 53-man roster. And so I did. I came up with 53 guys, and there were 8 guys that I named to my 53-man roster that played. Now, that does mean something when you're talking about a team like the Rams, because generally, once you've solidified your spot on the roster, you're done for the preseason. There are some exceptions, of course, and one of them would be Brennan Jackson. I think the Rams had to play him because he's finally able to, received no snaps during the preseason. Rookie edge rusher that's probably going to have a role when he's healthy. So he was out there. That's to be expected. I didn't know he was going to be ready to go. Sean Jolly was out there a lot, and I have a feeling that's not a good sign for him. Charles Woods and Josh Wallace, 2 undrafted free agent cornerbacks. If they were out there, they were out there very little. I didn't notice either of them. Haven't seen the snap counts yet. I have a feeling one or both of them could make this team. Another guy that was out there a lot, 2 defensive linemen actually, Corey Durden and Carlos Watkins, I had on this 53-man roster. And no Deshaun Johnson, at least I didn't see him, who I had off this 53-man roster, and he was probably the last guy I had off. Didn't feel good about it. It's kind of nice having a Mr. Irrelevant on your roster, isn't it? But so I may have been wrong there, and I think Durden and Watkins, one or both of them, could be off. And Johnson, again, unless he was dinged up, I think Johnson's on this 53-man roster, and that's one of my pet peeves with the Rams insiders. We just don't get good information before the game on some of this stuff. We didn't know how bleak the outlook is for Havenstein if we're reading between the lines with what Sean McVay said, or Les Snead on the sideline there. And we don't know much about these other injuries. I didn't know Brennan Jackson was going to play. So there's some other things that are kind of sneaking up on us during the game that I wish this was shared with us, but sometimes we're the last ones to learn. Other guys that played, O'Shawn Mathis was out there a little bit, playing special teams. I had him on the 53, so maybe not. Maybe he's a bubble player. Jason McCullough was out there early. I think he's on this 53-man roster, though. Again, some of these guys have to play. It's just a numbers game. But the biggest surprise really was Xavier Smith, that he played and how much he played. And we had all thought 6 wide receivers on this roster, plus Xavier being the 7th. Xavier's out there, no sign of Tyler Johnson, and maybe Smith hasn't made this roster, but man, he's been playing so good, so valuable, and can return the ball as well. So that was surprising. So Jolly, McCullough, Scott, Durden, Jackson, Watkins, Mathis, and Xavier Smith, and Boston Scott. The Rams go out and sign Sir Roderick Thompson. And, Sean McVay had said, hey, Boston Scott's still going to get a heavy load. If the Rams are carrying 4 running backs, that 4th running back was playing in this game, and I don't see the point. I don't think they could carry 3 running backs, could they? They can't carry 3. And so why isn't Sir Roderick Thompson getting the bulk of the carries? He got 3 carries in the 4th quarter. That's it. So made no sense to me. Maybe Boston Scott has not nailed down a roster spot. Maybe it's Zach Evans. Everybody seems to think it's Boston Scott, though, and I'd be in agreement with that. But Zach Evans had some nice carries, 2 touchdowns. He seems to be slowly improving, but I think Boston Scott brings a little bit more to the table. So that's what probably the biggest takeaway as far as, I shouldn't say the biggest, those are all my takeaways from as far as who played and who didn't in this game. Hey, let's go over my wish list. Didn't do very well. Let's see. I wanted to see Stetson Bennett improve his accuracy. He didn't play. And that's another thing that we didn't find out till right before the game. At least I didn't. Stetson Bennett not playing. And when I talk about my wish list, I published the other day my fearsome 4 wish list, the 4 things I wanted to see in this game. So that was number 1, Bennett's improved accuracy. Went 0 for 1 there. And then I wanted to see Evans and Carty, Ethan Evans and Joshua Carty, step it up a little bit, have good games. Ethan Evans, I don't know, man, he had a couple good kicks, but is actually, I think his better kicks were where we're asking for, placement inside the 20, but he had a couple of kicks that just were not very impressive, and Joshua Carty misses an extra point. So I'm going to say I'm 0 for 2 there. I wanted to see some sacks and takeaways. Hey, mostly second and third string guys. So how important is that? But I think it's just a vibe, a personality you want to develop on your team. The Texans muffed a kick, and we recovered. And we had 1 dropped interception by Neal. The one by Taylor, I'm not going to call that a drop. It was tipped, deflected into his chest. That's pretty tough to call that a drop. So I'm going to say we went 0 for 3 there. I don't think we had a sack. Didn't really bring a lot of pressure, actually. The Texan quarterbacks had a pretty good day overall. And then, speaking of quarterbacks, is that a mismatch, Case Keenum versus Dresser Wynn? As far as experience goes, not throwing shade on Dresser, but Texans definitely had a advantage there, looking at the starting quarterback matchups. And the 4th thing I wanted to see is players, if you're on this roster, sit. And I guess I can't grade myself on that yet because I don't know who's on this 53-man roster. If Boston Scott ends up on this roster, then I think I'd go 0 for 4 there because he should have sat. Don't get it. And there's a couple other guys I think that are going to end up on this 53-man roster that, hey, maybe the Rams need to play those guys to get one last look to help them make their decision. I could only guess at this point. A couple other things I wanted to share. Jump on the 49ers here for a second. Kyle Shanahan likes to play his starters in the preseason a little bit. The Rams do not. And 49ers may have paid the price in that game Friday night. Leonard Floyd and their other defensive end, Gross Matos, both suffered knee injuries. I don't think they're real serious. Still waiting to hear word on that. But 49ers a little bit thin at that position already. So that's a real bummer for them. And again, there's an advantage to playing your guys in the preseason a little bit, but there's a risk involved, and the 49ers may have just realized that. Hey, did you see Les Snead walk over to Jared Verse and Braden Fisk, and camera was on them when Snead was talking to them? You know what they were talking about, right? They were talking about Florida State losing to Georgia. You could tell by their expressions. I don't think the announcers caught what was going on there. And actually, I didn't catch it either. And my special assistant, who knows everything, texted me and said, you know what they were talking about, right? And I said, oh, man, you are probably right. Les Snead consoling his 2 Florida State grads. And it looks like Les Snead has thrown cold water on the idea of bringing in a veteran to serve as the number 2 quarterback weeks 1 and 2 rather than having Stetson Bennett fill that role. And he explained it pretty well. Hey, we could bring in someone. And if it's someone that hasn't been here before, we're going to have to throw so much resources at him, so many resources that it's just not worth it. We'd rather spend those resources on getting our offense ready, getting Stetson Bennett ready for a potential backup situation. So no, we are not bringing in a backup quarterback. Stetson Bennett is the guy. Somewhat trivial, but I also wanted to talk about the point after situation at the end of the game there. Rams go for 2, don't get it, and then choose to let the clock run out. And hey, the way I'd look at it is, who cares, actually? But they were trying to tie the game. Why not? And the other alternative is you run Josh McCarty out there to see if he can hit a gosh darn extra point. But you know what? I'm glad they didn't. And I'm glad they didn't try to get the ball back at the end there, because just, additional snaps here for either unit, not that important. And you run Joshua McCarty out there. Hey, real quickly, wanted to talk about this point after situation at the end of the game. They go for two, don't get it. I'm okay with that. Why not? The alternative is you run Joshua McCarty out there and have him try to hit a darn extra point. But what if he misses it? Then what do you do? So I don't know, man. I'm kind of glad they left him on the sideline. And it's going to be a little bit nervous time for us in Detroit. We're running Joshua McCarty out there. He has not alleviated all of my concerns quite yet. Now, let's go through this roster position group by position group. What are the remaining questions we have? We have one very significant question to answer. I'll get to that last. Quarterbacks, Les Snead answered that question for us. Running back, is it Boston Scott or Zach Evans? Wide receiver, does Xavier Smith make this roster as the 7th wide receiver? Tight end, no questions there. I'm going to skip the offensive line. Defensive line, it looks like Deshaun Johnson has made this team. Where does that leave Corey Durden and Carlos Watkins? Edge rusher, is Mathis the 5th guy? Do they carry a 5th edge rusher? Linebacker. Now, that's another thing we learned before the game. Omar Spates and Jacob Hummel have both made this roster for inside linebackers, and I feel really good about that. Let's see, who else? Cornerbacks. Do Charles Woods or Josh Wallace or both of them make this roster? I don't think Cam McCutcheon does. I don't think Trey Tomlinson does. Cam Lampkin, maybe he has a shot, probably not. And safety is Jalen McCullough. I think I called him Jason earlier, is Jalen McCullough on this roster. And last of all, offensive line. Okay, worst case scenario, Rob Havenstein can't go. We already know Lyric Jackson is suspended. So I deduce, we roll Warren McClendon and Joseph Nopum out there. Who's their backup? Is this a path for A.J. Curry to make this roster? Is Casey Leviston going to be ready? He has not played a down in the preseason that I'm aware of, still dinged up. Yeah, I don't know. And I actually left off on the defensive line. I should also mention Laurel Murchison. He's a good candidate to go on short-term IR, designated for return after 4 weeks. So the offensive line, though, that's the biggest question for me. What do they do there? It's again, we do have some depth. We have some guys that have proven they can play, maybe not at the highest level, but get us by until Big Rob is back, and then week 3, Alaric is back. I would just, man, it would be really nice if Big Rob could be back for this Detroit game, and then we have McClendon or Nopum as a starter and one of them as the backup, because I don't know if there's anybody else on this roster right now that I could trust to take over at left tackle. Are we kidding? Yeah, kind of important. So that's the biggest question. And hey, we may find out. We may have some clues to what the Rams are thinking. Tuesday night, roundtable, we'll talk about it. This Rams initial 53-man roster. And you know what? The Rams will be watching the waiver wire, especially interior defensive line. And hey, is there maybe someone going to cut a decent left tackle that we can borrow for a couple of weeks? We'll get to that Tuesday night out here from Rams Up.